All right, great panel coming up. So available technologies and interoperability. This is going to be a continued conversation on some of the topics that we touched on in the last session. So I'm going to turn it over to Kai Seeley, Engineering Fellow at Witricity Corporation. I'll let you take it away.
Thank you very much for joining us here today. I'm excited about this panel. I've met each of our panel participants, and it's going to be a great opportunity to learn a little bit today. So I hope you all enjoy as well. We're going to get started with just a quick name and title of each of our panelists, and then we'll come back around and I'll have them do a little more complete introduction to tell about themselves and the company that they represent. So go ahead.
Noor Musa, CEO of Translucent Energy.
My name is Sun. I'm Loop's Chief Hardware Officer.
Emil Abdel Shahid. I'm the Assistant Director of Power New Business and Electrification at the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power.
Praveen Mandel, CTO of NovaCharge.
Okay, yeah. Tell us a little bit about yourselves, your history, background, and the company you represent.
So the main purpose of Translucent Energy, we operate across, is to reshore manufacturing into the US. We do that across two main verticals, PV manufacturing and energy storage, utilizing supercapacitors as a means of storage. Very new to the industry. I founded Desert Technologies, which is a similar platform covering the full value chain from manufacturing, EPC, development investments that operates across Middle East, Africa. On the development investment side, we have a joint venture with Siemens. It's Siemens' first and only infrastructure fund. Prior to that, real estate development. Prior to that, I helped launch Nissan throughout North Africa and Fujitsu, a subsidiary of Fujitsu as well.
My background is I came from Solar City, Tesla, and then joined Loop. Loop is a company that focuses on creating accessible, affordable charging solutions on both the hardware and software side, and trying to create a very comprehensive solutions for building owners, operators, officials to find the most optimum path towards, evolving to providing EV charging solutions for their customers, constituents, and doing it in a way where it takes a lot of the pain points that we know of in working directly with building owners as a previous energy service company and solving that for them. I think one of the biggest challenges with building owners, officials, operators is, what is EV charging? How should I think about it? And if I want it, how do I even deploy that solution? Like, what fundings do I have? What is the technology out there? And what network do I use? How much does that cost? So on and so forth. And we're solving that by just making it streamlined by using software and providing financial products to make that a more compelling solution. And also with our Loop network partners, which is developers, contractors, distributors, putting that solution, putting that piece of the solution to them if they don't already have it. Otherwise, if they do have to provide a recommended contractor, we can train them and then get them to use our technology as a solution.
So my background, I spent about 17 years in the utility industry with the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. Worked as a design engineer for many years, helping customers bring power to their developments. And I've spent a number of years also working in operational technology, smart grid, and sort of the IoT of the utility. And my current position, I have to help customers. I'm back to my original designing, but more on a management level. But the goal is to help all our customers bring their electrical loads to the grid. And also a big component of that is, at least for the city of Los Angeles, is driving home the electrification goals that we have. whether it's through transportation electrification, building electrification, and or the City of LA's aggressive decarbonization strategy and position. So our job is working with our customers to help execute our aggressive goals and help the customers meet theirs as well.
Yeah, hi, I'm Praveen Mandel, and so CTO at NovaCharge. NovaCharge is a soup to nuts and EV charging solution provider. AC level 2, DC fast charge, network management platform, all of that stuff. We even come by and wipe off bird doo-doo from your stations, right? So, which is a problem in this industry, for the record. So my background for purposes of this conference is I was the founder and president of ChargePoint. I also was the chief technology officer at Volta Charging, which just got bought by Shell. And then I also had a AI development shop, bunch of deep learning engineers and researchers and scientists that I had sold to Volta Charging, which is how I got to Volta Charging. And so I throw that out there because I do bring an AI perspective to this discussion.
Okay, great. So as you can tell, we have a very diverse group of panelists, and we should have some very interesting discussions based on some questions. So we'll start with some questions that I've put together, and then towards the end, we'll ask for some questions from the audience as well. So let's start with just the basics in terms of EV charging infrastructure today, okay? So what types of EV charging infrastructure are key to building our renewable transportation of tomorrow? Whoever wants to take it first, go ahead.
Why don't you take this?
I think sitting here next to LEWP is great. I think one of the major things that we need to solve is how to solve for the demand of EV, right? As it's really taken off exponentially now. I think a lot of people see that in the data. With that, there is exponential demand, right? But EV is different in that it's not a continuous load. It's just people charge roughly about the same time every day, right? And so, utility providers will see a significant peak in power, right? And so I think part of the solution there is to obviously increase power by the utility by adding, hopefully, renewable power, energy storage, something along those lines, but tap into the future, which is electric vehicle, which is otherwise mobile ESS, right? So how do we allow that to really supplement and not be just on the demand side, right? It's doing both. It's providing power and also taking demand. I think part of it is creating economics around that and obviously working collectively with vehicle OEMs, EVSE OEMs, grid operators, power aggregators to come up with a solution that will allow this to happen sooner.
So from a utility perspective, we definitely understand the capacity constraints that are created as a result of electrification of transportation. And so, from that perspective, our jobs is to do better planning, bring capacity to where it's needed, which is not a secret. I think throughout this conference, there has been many comments or questions about the utility and what can you do to move that a little quicker. But the reality of it is there's just places that don't have the capacity that people are asking for. And so from our perspective, really looking at industry to bridge that gap to when we can get the capacity that's needed, whether it's through software, managed charging technology, being smarter with the chargers. One of our fleet installations is, using managed charging, having 40 level 2 chargers on a 200 amp breaker. And those kind of things are what's going to make the difference of when you can get your charging infrastructure online quicker. And as part of the mobile energy storage discussion, we are, as the industry's moving a lot quicker than the utility, and the utility's required to adapt to what's happening in industry. And so we are starting to look at these larger fleets, bus fleets, electrified buses, as a means of mobile energy storage and bringing this commercial energy storage to the grid. And so actually, the Department of Water and Power on Tuesday approved a pilot for our commercial energy storage to grid. And so we're going to be looking to work with various property owners and bus fleets and things like that to implement this pilot as a means of meeting the capacity goals that we have for a renewable perspective, but also try to leverage it to manage our local needs in various areas.
Yeah, I think I just want to add one thing is what I'm seeing in the industry, and I'll just, maybe this is mice nuts, I don't know, but there's a lot of high frequency switching teams out there who are very good power system engineers, and they're starting to experiment with more efficient inverters and converters, is what it is. And so you're seeing efficiency go from like 88%, so that 12%, if it's 88% efficiency, 12% is heat loss, right? So moving more towards 97%, 98% power efficiency. And so I think every little thing adds up, I guess what I'm trying to say, right?
And it's interesting because what's happening is by 2030, right? The at least our anticipation, even 5 years ago, there's going to be a market mix of 70% of cars. Bloomberg assumes 50%, right? Where is the infrastructure today, right? And where we are, right? Whether it's utilities, right, which cannot really absorb such capacities. And I think, the solutions will come fragmented, right? Whether it's distributed solar, distributed storage, and means to gap a lot of these differences. There's no grid on the planet with very few countries, and that are ready for the evolution, right? For the EV evolution. And infrastructure needs to come before that, right? And I think part of the solution is going to come from solar, wind, storage, right? Different sources, and partnering up with the utilities. I mean, I think that is going to be key. Efficiencies is another one, right?
Yeah, definitely partnering up with the utilities. On the distribution side, looking to have better data, better technology so that we can more precisely move electrons when we need them or maintain our reliability with the new world of green energy and its variability. So it's a challenge because as we transition to the world of electric vehicles and electrification, we have to manage what we can generate and how we get that power to the customers. So it's definitely a challenge, but it's a partnership because we do our job as a municipal utility for the ratepayers, for the city of Los Angeles.
You've actually hit our strong point here, Emil. I mean, our standard product is 5C, which is basically, deploying electricity in less than 12 minutes. Our top-of-the-line product is 50C, and that's in less than 2 minutes. We can actually deploy and empty our storage in less than 2 minutes.
And that's exactly what the utility is looking for, is for industry to help bridge that gap from where there is no capacity to there is enough capacity to meet everybody's needs through technology like that.
Good, thank you. So, Emil, you talked a little bit about managed charging. I want to focus in on that topic a little bit and have each of you tell me what do you think managed charging is in your world, and how do we use it to streamline operations and ensure that the site hosts have a good ROI?
Sure. So in my world, managed charging is very, very critical to how we can bring and what type of capacity we can bring to the customers. As I mentioned, we have an installation at one of our parking lots where we have 40 level 2 chargers on a 200 amp breaker. The only way we can do that is through managed charging because the cars are going to be there all day, and we can we can throttle the charging as needed to meet the customer's needs, but also not have to do any any infrastructure upgrades on our end. We don't need to change out the panel. We don't need to bring in new capacity from the street, and that's a big deal. So that's what managed charging means to us at the utility. It's our ability to get you the service that you need quicker. It can make a huge difference for you as well from an ROI perspective. Bringing in capacity from 3,000 feet away is going to cost you millions of dollars. And from an electric vehicle charging perspective, that's a no-go. And there's no return for you there. And so managed charging minimizes that need to bring in capacity 3,000 feet away. And so that's really important to us because we don't want to be the obstacles. But the reality of it is there's just not enough capacity everywhere. Sometimes you get lucky and there's enough capacity, but regardless, managed charging needs to be part of everybody's investment, everybody's project, especially if you're looking to build out, a plaza of chargers, et cetera.
My take on it is that I was looking at it from the perspective of those who will own the units, maybe not operate them, but like the building officials, site operators, right, building owners. What does it mean to manage the charging stations, right? So I think right now there are a lot of people that are managing the charging station by just maybe offering them as a free commodity or otherwise, charging them a fixed fee per month for unlimited charging, right? The way I think about managing charging is that doesn't help with the ROI in a sense that you don't know as a building owner how much power is being used and whether or not people are using more than they're expected to because they have multiple vehicles and they're cycling through the same account, let's say, right? So managing the charging station means, first and foremost, the charging stations are communicating, they're intelligent, they're networked, whether it be a direct WAN connection or some type of indirect communication, right, to the charging station via, let's say, the mobile phone or through the vehicle, right? There's a different way of getting that usage data back to the data aggregator. But networking the charging station allows you to figure out how much power is being used, make sure that you're charging drivers accordingly for that, and otherwise baking in some cost to that will help with either the payback cycle of your investment or otherwise you're trying to create a secondary revenue stream for your businesses. But to your point, I do want to also talk about your point about how, from the perspective of not having to take more power than you absolutely need to, because these loads are not always turning on at the same time, right? And so we can power manage those loads in a couple of different ways. I'm not sure how DWP did that in your site. There's something known as static load management, where you're setting a static power threshold, where if a group of charging stations reaches that, prior to that, it starts curtailing power, right? And then obviously, to some extent, all the charging station might be, if simultaneously being in use at 50% or 25% of what its peak power is, there is something that we're also working on to make it a little more dynamic, right? So what I mean by dynamic is, let's say we throw on a few current transformers upstream, measure the exact live demand from the entire site, and work within those, right? As it varies throughout the day and night, charging will be able to work within that and not have to curtail power unless you absolutely need it, because otherwise you're going to trip a circuit breaker or cause some problems, right? But in doing that, if you also enable network load management, so those all can be run local, right? That intelligence can exist in either a site controller or built into the charging station themselves, and do that upon themselves, right? But if you open up a network layer on top of that, you're able to allow utilities to provide some type of demand energy response, right? If for whatever reason, just because that site is okay with power, but the grid might be overloaded in the middle of the summer, right? To send down a command to do so, right? But also some other bidirectional power if need be as well, so.
So I think it's all good. Like, a lot of these are rule-based systems, but I think in the future, these are all inputs, right? There's stakeholders, there's the driver, there's the utility, there is the host, right? And the host has her or his needs, right, in terms of ROI and everything. So I think a future system, which I think we should work towards, is you get all this data that's being collected, right? You download all the rules, right? And what are you trying to optimize it for? You make it a reinforcement learning problem, and the system, whether it's an MD or whatever, acts autonomously to satisfy the needs of the various stakeholders, if you will, right? So I think that's my dream.
Ideally, just to add on your point, I think the telecom industry has done that really, really well, right? Where you've got several different platforms communicate seamlessly and pass on information and I think that is what is truly needed in the industry today. I think that's a gap that somehow every system is closed up to their own platforms. If there were more integration among them or some sort of synchronization between them, something?
Yeah, I mean, I'm suggesting make it reinforcement learning is AI based, right? So have it constantly collecting data, learning from it, and acting autonomously, right? So you're seeing that a little bit in the security space. Like, a lot of the old, sorry, now we're going off topic a little bit. A lot of the old security appliances were very rule-based, right? And what you're seeing now with the new generation security appliances is they go in, they learn what the behavior is of the enterprise that they're securing, and anything out of that they flag as anomalies, if you will, right? So that's behavior modeling, and I guess that's what I'm suggesting in this space as well.
Okay, great. So I want to come back to some of these topics. I think you've made some great points. But let's look at the macro issue for just a moment, okay? Because we are talking a little bit about interoperability. And the EV owners today, there's generally a poor experience because sometimes you go to a charging station, there aren't opportunities when you plug in, it doesn't work the way that the user expects. It's a general problem that we have today, right? And so the question is, how are we going to improve the interoperability experience, and what technologies are going to enable that to fix those problems and make them better as far as EV experience goes?
Yeah, I mean, the short answer to that is open protocols, right? So you've got ISO 15118, which is communicating from the EV to the charger, so things can be, whatever the car wants to share, it can share it through that pipe, if you will. There's authentication as well. And then there's OCPP, which is communicating to the chargers itself. And there's OCPI, which is communicating amongst the charging point operators, as they call it, right? Charge point operators. The thing is if I draw parallels to the telecom space, you had open protocols, TCP/IP, and if you will, right? And what they did was they had actually third-party test facilities, like New Hampshire was one famous area where people would go and be an interoperability lab, so to speak, right? Because with all these things, there's conforming to the protocols, and there's what if somebody's not quite conforming to the protocols or is at the edge, right? Like, how do you find those edge cases? That's where you run into problems, right? And so I guess interoperability lab would be one way of doing it. There's also equipment like Keysights, for example, right, that emulate these protocols as well that helps with testing. So I'll leave it.
We do interoperability testing from the charging station network side with vehicle OEMs such like Toyota, Hyundai, and stuff like that, right? I think part of the challenge is that there are SIE standards for how do you test voltage sag, how do you test, just fault conditions, right, and how the charging station and network will respond to it. But there is no easy way of doing it, right? There is no way where, let's say, for example, there is a trusted third body where there is a easily available technology where you will just emulate some load, run through a script to really test stuff, and test it to the edge cases as well, right? And if there is a third-party body, which I don't know of at this point in time, where it would allow this transparency of who actually got validated vehicle, charging station, and what were they validated to, and how did it perform to certain specs, right? I think we will all feel a lot more comfortable saying that, it will work. We've tested it, and it will work. And then in addition to that, on the end of line process for either vehicle manufacturers or charging station manufacturer, deploy a very similar scripted test where you're actually pulling all the max load of what that charging station is capable of pulling, which is a difficult thing. You think about it, right? Like, A, how many vehicles out there can handle 300 kilowatts of DC? And then what infrastructure would be there to do that at all the OEMs out there, both on the charging side and the vehicle side, right? If we can standardize that protocol, this is what Loop is doing, at least in our facilities, being able to run a very detailed script to test not just whether or not it can turn on and turn off and stops during a certain fault condition, right? But can it handle the dynamic stress tests for all the different charge sequence that might happen? And is there a fail-safe mechanism that we can build into, specifically to the charging station, obviously working with the EVs as well, where if it can act as like a supplemental sensor, right? It can look at the battery's temperature via PLC communication, right? Pressures, state of charge, whatever information we can get from the vehicle, right? And just like, hey, that looks weird. It's not supposed to spike the voltage like that, right? Why is it? Maybe there's a runaway event. We should stop.
By the way, just to add to Song, the challenge that he's also talking about is you got EVs and you have firmware versions on the EVs, right? And just changing a firmware can change the characteristics of your EV, which then changes the handshakes with the EVSC and all that stuff.
I mean, a lot of the OEMs today, I mean, their protocols are very, very different, right? Mercedes does not allow basically fast charging unless you're outside the car and you've locked it, right? And you don't have those same protocols with all the different manufacturers, right? Each one has its own protocols. One can actually leave the other one not, and so forth. And how that communicates, sometimes it creates these small little errors with chargers, I mean, right? Now, but we're all at the very beginning, and I think, the industry is still in its infancy stage, right? I mean, globally, we're less than 7% market mix today, I think.
Probably less.
Excuse me?
It's probably less than that. It's probably
It's less than
5%.
that, right? Yeah, something like that, right? And in the US, it's around 7-8%. California being 13 or something like that. I'm like, the numbers are not.
The numbers I saw was like just new vehicle sales in the United States. It was like we've recently reached the new vehicle sale about 5% of it being actually battery vehicles.
As a market mix.
As a new vehicle purchase, not the entire mix. Just new vehicles being purchased.
New purchase, I heard it's 2/3 are being electrical.
Not yet.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
It will be. It has to be, at least in
It
California.
has to be, right? Well, I'm bullish on that, but we'll see.
Noor's trying to accelerate the whole industry.
It will get there, right?
Totally. By the way, and if there's any means that I can do that faster, I truly believe that.
Yeah, and as the industry continues to evolve, the protocols and communication and the data aggregation and being able to not just collect information but also send control signals for various incentivized charging periods or peak shaving or demand response. If I had to get my crystal ball out, I'd be able to tell you it's probably part of the future of what the utility is going to be looking for. And so trying to standardize, whether it's talking to the charger, talking to the car, asking it to reduce its charging or its pull from the grid at a certain time period is probably going to be needed in the very short term.
And I think AI is going to play a major role in all of this, right?
I agree.
Yeah, there's a lot of data that everyone is recording right now. Not sure what to do with it just yet, but maybe we can talk about that soon.
Yeah, let's delve into this data issue a little bit more. I know we live in a data-driven world, right, where data is key to improving efficiency. And I presume that utilities have a lot of data that can be used today. How can we leverage that data today, and what types of data do we need to be thinking about to really improve the future of tomorrow?
Sure. The answer, yes, utilities have tons of data. We have our geographic information on our system, where all our transformers are, what size they are, where our meters are. We have various outage information that we can correlate with our customers and figure out where our worst performing areas are that we need to beef up before we put more electric vehicle load onto there. But one thing that we really recognize that's important for people adopting electric vehicles is, or even developers trying to put in charging plazas, is really understanding what is available in that area before you make an investment. And so we really worked hard to use our geographic information system, our system data on the distribution side, also kind of looking at our planning information to figure out where our major loads are coming in and providing our customers a map where they can type in an address and figure out if that's a good place for electric vehicles. We thought that was a big win, not just for us, but also answers a million questions that our customers usually come to us with is, hey, if I buy this property, am I going to be able to put in my charging? Yeah, the answer is yes. It might cost you $6 million, or you might have capacity in the general area if you were able to analyze that map and select the right site for development. So there's a lot of data that we can share to make the developer's life easier. That doesn't answer all the questions, but at least starts that conversation and gives you some information to start making, so you don't need to assume. Aside from that, there's a ton of AMI data that utilities are really just at the tip of the iceberg with. There's a lot of smart technology. You have the Alexas, the smart appliances that are in people's homes that can really start, if leveraged correctly, can really start providing the industry a better idea of what's available for them anywhere across the service territory.
And Praveen, how does this influence your world with respect to AI, utilizing this data and changing the way we think about EV charging?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if we could get a hold of this data, that'd be valuable. Like, even in that example, you talked about a portal where a developer or a homeowner can go in and type in and say, hey, am I EV ready, as a question, if you will, right? Or I only have X much budget, what can I do with it, right? Like, it would be a recommender system, right? That would be amazing, right? So,
Yep.
yeah, so, I don't know, what was your question again, Kai? Sorry.
Yeah, it seems to me like there's a lot of opportunity when it comes to
Yeah.
newer technologies and utilizing data. I presume there are ways that we haven't
Yeah.
even thought about.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry. Yeah. So like one thing we did at Volta was we built a product called Predict EV, and what it was is it was a tool, machine learning tool, where the whole idea was at a given location, it would model driver behavior patterns, right? So what that means is, typically when they go to a site, let's say this Whole Foods, for example, right? How many miles are they driving to it? How many miles are they traveling away from it? How long do they stay, right? So it models dwell times, right? And it models what ratio it would be needed for opportunistic charging, as in just top-off charging, versus essential charging, like they need a charge because they're driving long distances or whatever it is, right? And then the whole idea there, I'm giving you a long-winded answer to this, but the whole idea here was, what would that look like over time with the EV growth in the community, if you will, right? And so the cool thing about it is, the idea here was it would output the mix of L2 and DC fast charge stations you need over a time period, right? So you don't have to upgrade the infrastructure right away. You might have capacity to handle it for the next year or two, if you will, right? And you can plan better, right? So that's an example of one area. But there's a whole laundry list, right, of things where machine learning can come in handy if you have the data set. Yeah.
Just to add to that, and I talked about this, of future grids, right, and how they're going to look like, right? In 2030, what if all three of us are basically low on 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 charge, and basically we need to charge, and we're all going to the same destination, right? Would that actually be fed to the utility to actually start, shifting loads and for predictability, AI?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think autonomous systems is where the dream should be, right? So the sharing of information and acting based on updated data sets, if you will, autonomously, right? So, yeah, I feel that's the future.
Yeah, and from a operational perspective, when we get to that future where we're all going to need charging and we're all heading to the same charger, it'd be great to divert people to various chargers where we know they're available, we know there's capacity, we know it's not going to put a burden on the grid, but also just from an operational perspective, having all that done without human input is very very tempting. And so, from a utility perspective, it's great, and we can get to that point. And I do think we have mounds of data that we need to hand over to Praveen so that he can help us get there. But it's really leveraging everything that we have to create that world where the cars are talking to the utility, the chargers are talking to the utility, the cars and the chargers are talking, the electrons are moving in the right direction based on this input we're getting from all these different data sources. Yeah. So
you've heard of autonomous vehicles. This is autonomous grid management.
yes.
Okay, so we have 10 more minutes before we get to the audience questions. I want to ask a little bit about rethinking the EV charging infrastructure. So we're all familiar with traditional gas stations. It seems like a lot of people are trying to mirror that model of traditional gas stations. But how would rethinking EV infrastructure and charging in general help? And what technologies would really enable us to have a better experience than perhaps putting in your gas tank and filling it up?
I'll go first. I think with the evolution of electric vehicles and just the ability to not rely on, liquid fuel, if you will, is that electricity is pretty much everywhere. Everywhere around us is electricity, right? So where we can put the charging stations to refill your batteries, that could be redefined based on how we would like to, right? So for example, if you don't need to go to the gas station, would you? When would you, actually? Well, that would be more of the question, right? And so if we can position equipment where you would frequent anyways, whether it be your home, work, retail, obviously off the road, right, when you're going long distance, that will redefine how we live and the amount of time we get back because we don't have to reroute somewhere, right? It's just part of the way we live now is just how we would typically drive, right? So I think if we couple that with the ability to automate or just otherwise make the charging mechanics, more convenient, I think that would just become a second thought to how we live, right? So whether it be robotic arms to charge our vehicles or wireless charging technologies, right? If we can do that, I think that would allow that super convenience that I think we all are getting to a point where we always want things more convenient, right? But also it makes it a safer product, right? If you don't have to touch a high voltage cable to put into your vehicle to charge super fast, and otherwise you just park and walk away and there's a mechanism in place to allow you to charge, I think everyone will want that. It's just trying to get the technology right and get it at a price point where we can proliferate that technology.
Yeah, I think San's talking about like seamless experiences is probably the word that comes to mind. So, and we're not there yet, but I think that's where
Soon. We have something.
Yeah, but sorry, go ahead, Nora.
No, please.
No, but part of seamless experience is also reliable infrastructure, if you will, right? Like people shouldn't be when their app shows, hey, there's 5 available charging stations there. They shouldn't go there and go, well, half of them are broken, right? It's like, there's a lot of fixing that needs to happen in the 1.0 infrastructure world right now, right? So yeah.
There's two pieces there. There is the ability to do that, and then there is the reliability of us trusting that it works all the time. But those are decoupled things, right? I think we need to solve them separately, whether it be not having to force people to always be members to charge, or otherwise there's stuff broken, right? Like those are two different things.
When we started the journey in one of my subsidiaries on EV infrastructure, and we were advising Porsche on actually where they should actually place fast charging across 22 countries, from India all the way to South Africa, and what decisions we needed to make, what criteria we needed to choose. And it was all about basically entertainment, right? And basically their natural, work, entertainment. But the big attraction for fast charging was entertainment. How are they going to be entertained, right? Whether it's a cinema, whether it's a mall, whether it's the park, right? Whether it's places that, the airport, right? Those are central attractions, right? Where you're either forced to go there, right? Or you're drawn to go there. I think, and that lends to what you also just said, right?
Yeah, from to sort of flip the script on the whole idea of gas stations, I think that's happening in general, just as the industry continues to evolve. There's this idea where the consumer also becomes the provider of electricity, and so they become sort of this hybrid, this prosumer or pro-consumer of stuff. Where you have large bus yards, you now have another mechanism of monetizing these large fleets by providing power back to the grid, or even providing power back to another vehicle. And similarly for people with single-family homes, they can get their charging at one time of the day, and then potentially provide power to their homes at another part of the day. We've heard this term about arbitrage. At certain parts, charge your batteries. This infrastructure is becoming not just a consumer of electricity, but also potentially a big provider of electricity. And as we continue to evolve, the utility is trying to take those steps to try to meet our decarbonization goals, which are almost nationwide at this point. But Los Angeles is pretty aggressive. So we're really looking at how can we leverage these large batteries, these large fleets to really support what we're trying to accomplish from a decarbonization perspective, but also provide the people investing in these large fleets another way of monetizing it.
Just a follow-up question on, if you don't mind, Kai.
Go ahead.
So just to ask actually the two operators here, right? Do you think of actually selling electricity back to the grid as part of your business model?
Yes, we do that.
No, the operators themselves to sell you or basically access.
Well, the short answer is yes, right? I think the more complex answer is how, and what economic systems do we put in place to incentivize it, right? Where obviously, I don't speak on behalf of utility here, right? But if we could supplement the grid, that will help solve some of your problems, as long as we communicate, right, and plan ahead. The technology is mostly there. For the AC charging station, still needs to be wrapped up in terms of certification, what that test looks like. There's certain applications for it, such as buses and residential vehicles, and to some extent other types of fleet vehicles, right, where the economics make sense for the owners of those vehicles to do so. It is trying to spin up the virtual power plants in a way where, if DWP is willing to pay 50 cents a kilowatt hour for energy export, then maybe, but that's like a weird economics, right? Like, when would it make sense to do so? Like, it's 50 cents per kilowatt hour of export from, let's say, distributed energy sources makes more sense than spinning up another facility, whether it be coal or some other type of generation, right, for that 2 hours or 3 hours of certain times of the day, right? The answer might be sometime yes. The answer might be sometime no, right? But if DWPs and other utilities are open to that because it does make monetary sense, and why not? Because there's these mobile energy storage devices out there, then I think we can make it happen.
So I'm going to stop you right there just for a moment. There's a lot of great information and the questions that have developed in my mind from this discussion. But I want to give an opportunity now to the audience to ask questions. So feel free to raise your hand, stand up and speak into the mic, introduce yourself, and ask your question. Thank you.
Hey, that's a hot mic. Yeah, okay, I'm Nicole Lee. I work with Kinectrics. Kinectrics is a third-party testing company. So as you were discussing testing, we have a high current lab that tests the AC and DC. We're currently testing components for EVs. We also are performing arc flash studies for manufacturers. So when you're asking about testing, we have that capability. Our labs are in Toronto. I'm located out of our office in California. So.
Well, I'm interested in hearing your thoughts on. We are aware there are a lot of certification bodies out there, including third-party testing facilities, right? But there are instances out there in which vehicles and charging stations fail to work, and it breaks both, right? Breaks the vehicle, breaks the charging station, right? So I don't necessarily think there is a lack of testing facilities, right? It's just more of like, how do we solve that problem, right? I think there's edge cases in that situation, whether it be that the vehicles are not tested some type of dynamic stress test protocol, or the charging stations are, or that the fact that not all of them always are, right, as they leave the assembly line, right? Some vehicles, manufacturers and charging stations only test, batches of them at the time, or then maybe they test all of them at the time, but they only do some level of tests at the time, right? So.
And would you say that's due to a lack of standardization? Like there's a lack of standards?
I don't think it's a lack of standard. Maybe it is because there is no like third-party database where you're like, hey, that particular unit that has performed all tests, and here's all the tolerances for that test, right? And the fact that it's difficult, right? You imagine trying to test all the charging station, all the vehicles to very high power. That's a lot of energy consumption, and anyways.
Great. Some other questions? We've got a few. Thank you.
Hi, Nadav Gore, Port Power. Question for Emil, really. So you talked about the data you have, and we talked about the need for that data in the context of developing sites, knowing how much it would cost to, and how long it will take to get enough electricity to a site. Now, as a utility, I'd like to ask you, there were commercial real estate panels before, and people like the CEO of Volterra said, well, we're basically building the capability to try to analyze because you never know until you actually get there, and so on and so forth. When utilities talk to each other, are you looking at creating some kind of a standard practice of sharing this information publicly such that developers can go and actually develop where you guys have the resources as opposed to keep trying to develop sites that cannot be developed, that will take years to develop or will take millions to develop, because that's just increasing the friction in the system and slowing down the entire industry.
So every utility operates a little differently, whether it's through different distribution voltages or a different system layout or a different configuration. So I'd like to say that we do definitely talk to other utilities. There's no real standard approach of how we deal with the need to give customers better information, but we do learn from each other. Now, with that said, we always like to make sure there's a clean delineation. There's the line side, and then there's the the meter side, the load side. And so, as a utility, I think we do our job pretty well of making sure the power gets there in a reliable and safe fashion. And we're very involved in listening to our customers and to developers about what's needed. And so, to kind of give you to answer your question, we are taking steps to make information more and more available to the extent that we can, right? Because once you've decided that you want to develop a site, there's various elements to it. You can be fed overhead, you can be fed underground. That cannot be determined by the customer. That needs to be determined by the utility. Even if you see a pole line behind the back of your property, doesn't necessarily mean it can provide you the amount of power that you need. And so, and one customer doesn't always, we can't depend on one customer to think about the rest of the neighborhood. That's what the utility is responsible for making sure reliable power gets to your site, but also everybody else's. So as much of the data as we can make available to you so you can make a good business decision without promising you capacity is what we're trying to do. And we're doing that by not just making our capacity available across the city, but as more and more information on what's being developed in those areas is available to us, we update those maps so that it's more realistic. It's not a 10-year, this is what the capacity was 10 years ago. It's pretty live. And that's the best information we can give you until you come to us and start working with us and developing your site. Because every site is going to be a little different.
Okay, thank you. I saw one question over here. Let's have that.
Hi, thank you. Hi, Kristen McCourt. I work for Momentum Groups. We're an EVSE reseller. So I work with a lot of customers. And one of the key takeaways for me at this conference is to engage with the utility company early and develop a relationship to ensure the success of our projects. But also, when we're talking about the interoperability of these EVSEs, one of the things is network connection. So my question is twofold. Has anyone engaged with the big players in the telecommunications industry? And do you think it's beneficial?
In terms of engagement with the telecommunication industry, you mean to really
prioritize our network connections?
I mean, I would say that we haven't necessarily had that conversation with the telecom companies. I mean, although we have relationships with them because, we provide them service to their cell sites, et cetera. But we definitely have not driven that conversation with them. We are looking to, we typically look to industry to help us solve our problems. We don't manufacture EVSEs. We're not in the business of creating software, but we definitely look to industry to help drive the need to standardize or prioritize those communications.
If I may, so there's a couple ways of looking at this. There are people companies in the industry doing this right now where, Loop included, where we're approaching the inconsistency of a network connection, and how do we address that, right? To just otherwise make it so that charging is an afterthought, right? You don't have to see if I click a button if it does work or does it throw an error, right? The only way to do that is both, right? Working specifically with the ISPs of the world, and having the ability to hop networks. If one goes down, you can immediately shuffle to the next one, right? Instantaneously. And we're doing that already. But I think part of the way of solving that as well is to not always rely on the network, right? So if there are abilities to transact and initiate a charge session, regardless if either yourself has an internet connection with your phone or the charging station has internet with their phone. You can run credit cards if you want to as well, and that's how we did it back in the days. For those who remember credit card transactions back in the days, right? There's a delayed consistency that is completely okay. And so, there's a lot of technology you can do that right now. There's edge processing, there's Bluetooth communication between the vehicles and the car, there's credit card readers that works online and offline because of the delayed consistency of the payment, right? Because the ledger of your payment balance exists in the chip of your credit card already. So if you plug it in, you already know how much balance you have, and so you can charge, and that balance gets removed, and you can bring it on to the next charge, and so on and so forth. So we're solving that. There's some other companies are solving that as well. We're going to figuratively flip on the switch to enable that with a lot of our charging stations to work both with internet and without internet, and just not force people to. It's convenient if you do have an app, let's say, to do that, but you don't have to, right? We're going to make it accessible to non-members as well via a credit card reader that also works with or without internet. So hopefully that solves that problem.
So if I may, I'm sure there are a lot of questions left in the audience. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to invite all of you to find our panelists afterwards with additional questions. But let me just start finishing up this session by asking each of you in a very short 1 to 3 sentences, what are the key takeaways that you have for the audience as with respect to interoperability and the discussions we've had today? So maybe just start here with Noor and
All right.
work our way down.
So by 2030, the world is going to be a different place altogether. And I see all of our issues actually being resolved, right? All the current issues of interoperability, connectivity, a lot of the current issues are going to be dissolved. And we are not even going to recognize where we are today.
I would provide a little more specific to what he's talking about, because I'm very excited about the specifics, right? I think, like I mentioned before, right, I am very excited to make charging station will be ubiquitous, right? The way you charge, the way you live, that everything in that will be very seamless, very natural. The technology, although is a bit inconsistent now, will be resolved. And some of the stuff I talked about is how we're going to resolve on that, right? We're going to build a lot of redundancy in there. We're going to make sure that everything works at edge cases. We're going to automate all that. We're going to use a lot of data to help us understand how to predictively provide power and otherwise export power. So very excited about that.
Like I said, I think managed charging is going to be an essential part of the future in some way, shape, or form. Spoiler alert, there's not enough capacity everywhere to handle EVs today, and so we look to industry to help us bridge that gap and eventually be able to get everybody what they need.
Yeah, I think Noor's 2030 vision, besides EV conquers the world, is seamless experiences, and seamless experiences will be enabled by a lot of these emerging technologies, both on the hardware side, rethinking the installation architecture, rethinking how you charge people with and without connections, data, AI, all of that, all the buzzwords will help enable this seamless experiences.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to put in a shameless plug. I'm speaking on wireless power at 3:15 in Theater 3, if you're interested in that. But in the meantime, thank you very much to our panelists. Big round of applause. Excellent conversation. Have a great day.